After Midnight by
I am
Claire
so sorry,
Cofer.
folks, but we are closing up for
Prologue.
the night.
20 years is enough to forget a face, not enough to forget the voice that once told you, wait. 4 former classmates still sat at the corner table. The tables around them had long since emptied. The chairs at the neighboring ones were already stacked for the night. The waiter had come by once already, politely as he should, to remind them that the restaurant was closing. They nodded. No one moved. He walked away. A few minutes later, he came back and reminded them again, this time with considerably less patience. One of them turned an empty coffee cup around in his hands as if it might give him a reason to stay one more minute. Another stared at her phone without scrolling. A third had already opened his mouth twice to say something and changed his mind both times. The fourth carefully folded a napkin into quarters, then into quarters again, until it was the size of a postage stamp. All evening, each of them had kept up a front, the smile, the career, the photos of their kids on their phones. But facades wear down faster than people do, and this evening had gone on just long enough for the first cracks to show. None of the 4 dared to be the first to stand. Some conversations can wait a day, a week, even a year. But there are conversations that will wait as long as they have to, until one evening they finally get said. Chapter 1. The Cafe Before Closing. Sam was the one who finally stood up. Not because he'd given in first. Someone had to, and there was no point sitting in silence any longer. "Let's go," he said. "The Harbor Cafe's still lit up." Outside, it was colder than it had looked through the restaurant windows. Maya zipped her jacket up to her chin. Iris caught her heel on the threshold and swore under her breath, and at that small, ordinary word, all 4 of them relaxed their shoulders for a moment, as if someone had finally said something real. No one asked what kind of place it was, a cafe on the corner of the waterfront, one they'd walked past 1,000 times and never once gone into. From the street, it looked like a warm smudge among the dark storefronts, as if someone had deliberately left one window lit for whoever had nowhere else to be. They walked in silence. At this hour, the city belonged to other people, night shift taxi drivers, the wind off the water carrying the smell of salt, even a block from the shore. 4 sets of footsteps on the wet asphalt, none of them in sync. No one suggested calling a cab. Walking meant a little more time together, without having to say so out loud. On the corner, Maya stumbled on an uneven paving stone, and Owen caught her elbow, faster than he'd had time to think about whether he should. He let go the second she found her balance. Both of them looked away at the same moment, as if something more important than the sidewalk had suddenly appeared there. For a few more steps, both of them walked too straight, too deliberately, the way people walk when they're trying not to think about a hand they just touched. Behind them, Sam and Iris were walking a little closer together than the width of the sidewalk required, and neither of them seemed to notice. He said something, she laughed, and the laugh came out different than it had at the restaurant table, quieter, more real, not meant for anyone but him. The door of the cafe opened with a soft chime. Inside, it smelled like coffee and something warm and homey, cinnamon maybe, or just warmth itself. The room was small, a few tables, a wooden counter, lamps that gave off more warmth than light. Someone had left a book open on the windowsill, cover facing up, as if the reader had just stepped away and would be back any moment. Behind the counter, a woman was drying the last cup with an unhurried motion, even though it was well past midnight. From the kitchen came a faint hiss of an espresso machine, Someone back there was still working, preparing something for the morning. Somewhere deeper in the room, music played quietly, something instrumental, barely audible, the kind that didn't interrupt conversation so much as fill the pauses between words. "Still open?" Iris asked, as if apologizing for the fact that they were there at all. "As long as someone's here, we're open," the woman said. There was nothing rehearsed in the way she said it. It was just how things were. "Sit wherever you like." They picked a table by the window, out of habit, not choice. People who've spent too much time in restaurants always gravitate toward windows, even when there's nothing to see through them but their own reflection. They dropped their jackets over the backs of their chairs, and in that ordinary, everyday motion, something very old surfaced for a moment. This was how they used to sit at the same desk years ago, dropping their bags under their feet, with no idea that one day they'd be sitting across from each other as adults. A young woman in an apron took their order, 2 teas, 1 coffee. Sam stared at the menu a long time, though it only had a few lines on it. "I don't know yet," he said, and set the menu back down. A few minutes later, she brought everything without a word, just a quick smile at Iris when she said thank you. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, and went back to the register, leaving them alone with each other. "This is good," Maya said after her first sip, and in that one word the whole evening's exhaustion suddenly rang out, the tiredness she'd spent all night carefully hiding behind her smile. She seemed surprised herself that it had come out loud, and quickly set her cup back down as if she could hold something else in place besides tea. They each said one sentence about work, enough not to seem uninterested in each other, not enough for anyone to really listen. Maya turned her cup in her hands without looking up. Owen tapped a finger on the table, not to the music, just to keep his hands busy. "Here's mine," Iris said, holding her phone across the table. "Preschool graduation. Can you believe she's starting kindergarten already?" "She's beautiful," Maya said, and everyone looked at the photo for exactly as long as was polite, no longer. The phone went back down on the table, face down. Maya thought the photo was the only proof left that someone in her life needed her every day. Owen looked at it a beat too long before he handed the phone back. Sam didn't reach for it at all. Iris looked into her cup for a long time. She didn't drink. And then the table went quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when the easy topics run out. Maya turned her now empty cup in her hands. Owen looked somewhere past everyone, out into the dark beyond the window, as if that was where he'd find what the words were missing. Sam tapped his fingers on the table, not a tune, just a rhythm, something to keep his hands busy. Iris alone didn't move at all, staring straight ahead as if she were waiting for someone to say something and was afraid to miss the moment. No one said anything. The woman behind the counter came over to clear the empty cups from the next table, though no one had sat there for a while. She glanced toward them and nodded politely before turning back toward the kitchen. Nothing more than that. No names exchanged, no recognition. She simply moved a little slower than the job required. Near the far window sat another customer, alone with his coffee and his thoughts, and none of the 4 so much as glanced his way. The silence at their table returned, and this time no one wanted to break it with some stray sentence. It just went on, growing heavier with every second, until it felt almost physical, something you could have set down on the table beside the cups, and everyone would have seen it was bigger than all of them combined. A car passed outside, lighting the room brighter than the lamps themselves for a second, and then it was dark again. Somewhere in the kitchen, a spoon clattered against a sink. Someone at a nearby table laughed quietly and cut themselves off as if embarrassed by their own laughter in all this quiet. Maya drew breath to say something, then let it out without finding the words.
The clock over the counter ticked as loudly as clocks only do when nothing else is left to drown them out. God, Maya said quietly, to no one in particular, how many years has it even been? No one answered, because everyone already knew.
Chapter 2. The Dungeon. Remember the dungeon? Maya said it before she'd had the time to think about whether she should. The words slipped out into the silence that had just settled over the table, and all four of them looked up at once, as if she'd dropped something made of glass. Owen set his cup down on its saucer more carefully than he'd done anything all evening. The field trip to the castle, Maya added, quieter now, as if she'd startled herself with her own nerve. When the lights went out? She twisted a paper napkin between her fingers, though a second ago her hands had been resting calmly on the table. "Oh," Sam said, clearly relieved to have a safer subject to talk about, and leaned back in his chair. "Right, and someone started screaming like we were being buried alive down there." "That was me," Iris said, and something like relief crept into her voice, too. "Screamed out of surprise. It was pitch black. I couldn't even see my own hands. And one of the guys used his phone flashlight under his chin and told everyone somebody died in those walls 100 years ago." "That was you," Iris said. "Maybe," Sam smiled wider, pleased he'd managed to pull even a shadow of a laugh out of someone. For everyone else, it had stayed just a funny story from their teenage years, the crush of bodies in the dark, the nervous laughter, the kind of tale retold at every class reunion, a little more embellished each time, worn smooth now, barely resembling what actually happened. "You grabbed my hand," Owen said quietly, looking into his cup instead of at her. Maya went still. Her fingers, which had just been turning the cup, stopped halfway through the motion. "Because it was dark. I couldn't see where I was going." "No." He looked up, and there was nothing left in that look of the man who'd spent the last 10 minutes discussing suppliers. "That's the first time I understood it wasn't just school, that everything was serious." Owen nodded slowly, as if the admission had cost him some physical effort. "Me too." And he didn't finish the sentence. Maya's eyes followed a waitress passing by, and for a moment she let herself get distracted from the conversation, not because she'd lost interest, but because some things are harder to say while looking someone in the eye. "You switched to the other side of the classroom after that," Maya said. "It wasn't a question." "I did." "Why?" "I thought it would be easier." Owen paused. "It wasn't." He turned his cup on its saucer, once, twice, the same way she'd just been doing. "And I decided you'd just gotten tired of me." "You didn't." "I know that now. I didn't then." That was where Owen and Maya found each other 20 years ago. What came after happened just as quietly, closeness giving way, bit by bit, to the same two fronts they'd worn all evening. "We didn't even fight," Maya said suddenly, to no one in particular. "We just each went our own way, like that was somehow easier." "Easier," Owen repeated, and the word came out bitter in his mouth, nothing like the ordinary thing it should have sounded like. Someone at the next table laughed loudly, a stray, unfamiliar sound, and Maya flinched at it. Maya sat with the empty cup in her hands, not daring to look up. Headlights swept past the window and vanished just as fast, leaving the room in the same warm half-light as before. "It was serious," she said finally, quietly, almost to herself. "Back then, for me, it was really serious." Owen reached his hand across the table, only a few inches, not far enough to touch hers, far enough that she'd notice. Maya looked at that hand for a long second, but didn't move. "Why didn't you ever say so?" he asked, so quietly it came out more like a breath than a question. "Why didn't you?" she answered, just as quietly.
Neither of them moved to fill the quiet. In the weeks that followed that field trip, both of them were left with something neither dared name, a look in the hallway now and then, maybe a nod, never a word about what had actually happened in the dark. Sam and Iris stayed quiet, glancing between the two of them. Iris slid her chair a few inches closer to Sam's without seeming to notice she'd done it. The woman behind the counter passed by with a tray, slowing her steps for a second, and set down a fresh plate of cookies no one had asked for. Sam reached for his cup, though it had long since gone empty. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it and set the cup back down. Iris noticed and didn't ask. A car passed outside. A dog barked somewhere in the dark. Iris glanced at Sam and said nothing, though her thumb had gone still against her cup.
Chapter 3. The Song They Forgot. Owen finally pulled his hand back from the table. Maya still hadn't touched it, and reached for his cup, as if the ordinary motion might bring back some of the table's usual air. It didn't. "Remember the concert?" Iris said suddenly, her voice caught somewhere between laughter and panic. "When I just blanked out halfway through the song, forgot every word." Laughter returned to the table for a moment, a little more real this time than it had been back at the restaurant. "That was awful," Maya said, wiping an imaginary tear. "Thanks. Very supportive of you." Iris rolled her eyes but smiled. "I do remember not talking to anyone at school for a week after that. Felt like the whole world had seen nothing but that pause." "No one saw anything except you," Sam said. "You looked out at the audience like you were waiting for a miracle." "I was looking for the exit," Iris said. "I wanted to bolt backstage and never come back." He shook his head. "You were looking straight at me, Iris." She went quiet, meeting his eyes. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the tablecloth for a moment. Maya nudged Owen under the table with her elbow. Owen gave the faintest nod back, without taking his eyes off Sam and Iris. Sam had been standing by the soundboard that night, explaining something to the tech in a flat monotone, when the auditorium suddenly went quiet. The hall smelled like dust and hot stage lights. An old speaker buzzed faintly in the corner, and parents in the front rows raised their phones to record the performance. Someone backstage was shushing the younger kids waiting their turn. Iris's voice cut off mid-line, the ordinary, awful way a conversation dies when you suddenly forget what you are saying. The silence stretched into something much longer than a second. Someone coughed. Someone whispered to the person beside them. She stood on stage, blinded by the spotlight, seeing nothing but blurred shapes out in the dark of the hall. He looked up. Through the smoky auditorium, past 100 unfamiliar faces, they found each other almost instantly. I gave the smallest nod and mouthed the first word of the next line. "I saw it," Iris answered, "but I couldn't have, from that far away." "So how did you keep singing?" She thought about it for a second, as if working it out for the first time, turning the edge of a napkin between her fingers. "I wasn't reading your lips. I just knew. I looked at you, and the words came back on their own." The table went quiet. Even Sam, who always found something to fill a pause, said nothing. He looked at his hands instead of at her. "What was so scary about that?" "That you were too reliable." She smiled bitterly. "I was used to drama, to people you were always fighting with. There was nothing to fight about with you." She took a sip of tea, though it had long gone cold. Sam turned an empty sugar packet someone had left behind, folding it in half, then in half again, until it was a small, hard knot. "What is so scary about that?" "That you could just leave, and I'd have nothing to hold against you. No fight, no blame. You'd just be gone one day, and I wouldn't even understand why. I wasn't going anywhere." "And now?" she asked. She pushed her cup a few inches away, as if that might buy her time to think. "You had Rachel. 3 years, wasn't it?" 4. "So," Iris shrugged, looking away. I never once asked why you broke up, even though I wanted to. You could have asked. I could have, Iris smiled briefly without humor. But then I'd have had to admit why I cared. We broke up because she asked me once what I was thinking about when I went quiet. He looked away, like it was still hard to say. And what were you thinking about? Do you really want to know? She nodded, though there was more fear in it than resolution. That concert, he said simply. Always that concert. That word I mouthed to you from across the room. No one said anything. Maya stopped turning her cup. Nearby, a waitress quietly stacked chairs for closing. The woman behind the counter cleared their empty cups without asking if they wanted more. A few minutes later, she came back with fresh ones, hot, and set them down, without a word. You know what's the worst part? Iris said. I still remember the melody of that song, but in 20 years, I never once let myself listen to it again. She started to hum the first few notes, then stopped herself, as if she'd already said too much. Afraid? Afraid I'd remember it too well. I listened to it, Sam said quietly, a few times, always alone, always late at night, and every time, at the same line, I thought I should have walked up to the stage and sung it out loud with you, instead of mouthing it from across the room. Why didn't you? Because then I'd have had to admit the same thing you're admitting right now. Iris didn't answer. She just looked at him the way she hadn't in years, without the usual joke to cover the awkward silence. Her lips trembled slightly, holding back something she still couldn't bring herself to say. Sam finally let go of the crumpled sugar packet, setting it on the edge of his saucer, as if the gesture closed something. Owen and Maya, at their end of the table, had gone just as quiet as Sam and Iris a minute ago, each for their own reasons. None of the four said so out loud, and no one reached for a new topic. 20 years. No one argued. Chapter 4. 20 years. The silence that followed Iris's words didn't lift. It just settled over all four of them at once, and no one tried to shake it off. Maya turned her head toward the window and said it out loud, as if surprised by her own words. We lost 20 years. Not a question, not a complaint, just a fact, said so quietly it might have gotten lost in the noise of the espresso machine, if there'd been any noise. There wasn't, only the tick of the wall clock and a thin draft from under the front door, stirring the corner of a napkin at the empty table next to them. 20 years, Owen repeated, as if testing the word's weight. That's long enough to live an entire other life. We did, Iris said, just each our own. We could have had one together, Maya said quietly, looking at no one in particular. No one argued. Somewhere outside, an ambulance passed, its siren cutting through the night for a second before fading off towards downtown. Maya looked down at her hands, folded on the table. 20 years of everyday things, paperwork, a child's hand, other people's, and never once the thing she'd actually wanted to reach for. Owen sat very still, his own hands wrapped around his cup, saying nothing. Iris covered Sam's hand on the table, unnoticed, for a moment, no more, and pulled hers right back, as if she'd just been testing whether it was even possible. Sam took off his glasses and wiped them on a napkin, though there was no need. Iris stared into her cup so long the tea went cold for the second time that night. A rare car passed outside, lighting the room brighter than the lamps for a second, and leaving behind nothing but the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. You know what's worst about 20 years? Maya said suddenly. Not that they passed, that we didn't even notice it happening. It's like gray hair, Owen said. One morning you just see it in the mirror and have no idea when it got there. Except hair doesn't ask permission, Iris added quietly. We had a choice, we just never used it. And now? Maya asked, to no one in particular, just out loud, as if checking whether she was ready to hear her own answer. No one answered right away. It's almost 1, the younger waitress said, glancing around the empty room as if checking for a forgotten cup somewhere. "I see the clock too," the woman behind the counter said, not looking up from the cup she was drying. "Closing up?" The waitress glanced at the clock over the door, then at the empty tables, then back at her. That half-questioning, half-tired look people get when they already know the answer. She wiped down the counter with a damp cloth, the second time in the last hour, though it was already clean. Outside, the city had long since gone quiet. No passers-by, no lit windows in the buildings nearby, only the distant hum of the port, which never fully stopped. She looked over at the table, where the four of them had finally stopped talking about work and passing around photos, where even the jokes had run dry, and where now they simply sat in silence. The lamp above their table threw a warm yellow circle of light, in which steam rose off the cups in thin, still threads. "A little longer?" she said. The waitress shrugged and went back to the register, without a trace of annoyance, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world to keep a cafe open for 4 people who'd ordered 2 teas between them 3 hours ago. She started counting the till, glancing over at their table now and then, not with irritation, just glancing over now and then. "Maybe she wants to get rid of us?" Iris joked quietly, nodding toward the counter. "No, seems like the opposite," Maya said. "So what now?" Owen asked quietly, to no one in particular. "I don't know," Maya answered, "but it's still too early to go home." "I think so too," Iris said. Sam turned his phone over in his hands for a long moment, staring at a screen that had gone dark ages ago. All evening he'd talked about himself the least, listened, prompted, cracked jokes when the silence got heavy, and now that it was his turn to decide something, it seemed like he'd been preparing for this longer than any of them. "You know what?" he said finally, with a decisiveness that hadn't been in his voice all night. "I've got good tea at home you definitely won't find here. Indian, brought back from a work trip years ago, and I've never had the chance to share it with anyone." "What kind?" Iris asked. "Some kind of spiced blend. I don't remember the name, but it smells good enough to be worth a try." "And now's the moment for it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I don't think there'll be a better one." He set his phone face down on the table, the same way Iris had done earlier, as if the gesture helped settle something for good. Maya exchanged a look with Owen. Something passed quickly between them. Hesitation, then something like relief that someone else would make the call, so neither of them had to be the first to say the evening wasn't ready to end. Under the table, their knees brushed for a moment. Accidental or not, neither of them checked. "Come back to my place?" Sam said, plainly now, to no one in particular, and to all of them at once. No one answered right away, but no one said no either. Maya was the first to reach for her bag on the back of her chair, unhurried but no longer hesitating, and that simple motion settled things the words still hadn't. Iris got up right after her, as if she'd been waiting for any excuse to stop sitting still, winding the scarf that had spent all evening on her lap as she moved. Owen lingered another second, looking at the empty cup in front of him, before he stood up and zipped his jacket up to the collar. The woman behind the counter, seeing them getting ready to leave, came over to settle the bill, quietly, without a hint of the relief she probably had every right to feel at that hour. Maya held out her card, thanking her for her patience, and the woman just shook her head, as if the word didn't belong here at all. "Come back any time," she said simply. The bell over the door gave a quiet chime as the first of them pulled it open, letting a draft of night cold and the far-off smell of the sea into the warm room. Chapter 5. Come Back to My Place. Outside, it was colder than it had looked through the cafe window. Maya zipped her jacket up to her chin, and Iris shoved her hands straight into her pockets, wishing she'd brought gloves. The wind off the water, which had stayed at the edge of feeling all evening, now hit them straight in the face, carrying the smell of salt and something cold, almost wintry, though winter was still a long way off.
My car is around the corner, Sam said, pulling out his keys. 5 minutes on foot. No one argued. They walked back the way they'd come, only the silence between them was different now, heavy with everything just said. Every other street lamp was out, and in the dark stretches of sidewalk they had to walk more carefully, almost feeling their way. A few times someone drew a breath as if about to say something and let it out again without finding the words. Their steps slowed. "My fridge is probably empty," Sam said, as if suddenly worried about something ordinary, "except for a jar of pickles I don't even remember buying." "We're not going for the pickles," Iris said. "Good to know, though if the craving hits, I'm not against it." Maya walked a step behind the others, watching the lit windows of the buildings they passed. A few still had lights on, and she found herself imagining the lives behind each one. Who was still awake at this hour and why? In one window, a bluish flicker from a TV. In another, someone's silhouette washing dishes, slow and mechanical, the way people wash dishes when their mind is somewhere else entirely. "Are you not at all surprised we're heading to Sam's place at 1 in the morning?" she asked Iris quietly, falling into step with her for a moment. "Surprised, but not enough to say no." "Is that a good sign or a bad one?" "We'll see," Iris said, and quickened her pace to catch up with Sam. "You okay?" Owen asked quietly, falling into step beside her. "I don't know, honestly. You?" "Don't know either, but I think it's the first time in a long while that not knowing feels okay." She glanced at him sideways, something like gratitude flickering across her face, not for the words exactly, but for the fact that he wasn't pretending any of this was simple. The car sat under a dim street lamp, alone on the empty street. The alarm chirped twice, the doors opened with a heavy old sound, and the smell of leather seats and coffee drifted out to meet them. For a second, all four of them hesitated over who would sit where. "Maya, you take the front," Owen said finally. "I've got long legs. I'm fine in the back." That wasn't true. His legs weren't any longer than Sam's, but no one argued. Maya took the front seat, and Owen and Iris stayed in the back, a stretch of empty seat between them that neither had worked up the nerve to close yet. Sam started the engine, and the car filled with the low murmur of the radio, which he switched off right away. A block behind them, the Harbor Cafe stayed lit for a moment longer, the only warm window on a dark street, before the car turned the corner, and it was gone.
Chapter 6. The Balcony. No one turned the radio back on during the drive. Maya watched the city slide by outside the window, dark storefront signs, a few pedestrians hurrying home ahead of them, the lit windows of all-night shops, empty bus stops. Iris and Owen stayed quiet in the back seat, each on their own side, staring out their own window. The engine hummed steadily, filling the silence in the car almost on its own, too steady for anyone to risk breaking it with some stray sentence. On a turn, the car swayed slightly, and Owen's hand slid a few inches across the seat towards Iris before he pulled it back. Iris didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did and decided not to show it. Outside, an empty night tram flashed past, lit up from inside. "Much farther?" Maya asked, just to say something. "About 10 minutes," Sam answered. "I'm closer to the port." Silence again, not the heady kind from the cafe, something else, worn out, the way you feel after crying for a long time, when the tears are gone but the relief hasn't come yet. "We're here," Sam said, parking outside the entrance. The apartment was quiet, the building's neighbors long asleep, and the stairwell smelled of paint and other people's lives. The elevator was out. An outdated sign about it had been taped to the wall for what looked like a month. So they climbed on foot, 4 flights, counting the landings out loud the way people do when the silence of a stairwell feels too close for comfort.
On the second floor, behind someone's door, a muted TV played the late news, a bluish flicker leaking out under the threshold. Sam fumbled with his keys for a while, apologizing for the lock which had stuck ever since he moved in. 3 years, he said. 3 years, and it still sticks. Guess I'm used to it by now. The door finally gave way with a familiar creak that apparently, in 3 years, had never once made him want to oil the hinges. Inside, it was cozy in a plain bachelor kind of way. Not much furniture, a lot of books stacked directly on the floor where the shelves had run out. One framed photo hung on the wall, old from school, the whole class in the courtyard before graduation. Maya lingered in front of it longer than the others. She found herself in the second row, younger, a different haircut, a smile she barely recognized on her own face anymore. Standing a little apart from the rest, next to her was Owen, looking not at the camera but off to the side, the same way he looked now when he thought no one was watching. "I didn't know you had this," she said. "I hold on to a lot of things," Sam answered, not looking at her, already heading for the kitchen. Owen lingered on the photo for a moment too, his own 14-year-old face next to the rest of the class, and something in that boy's expression struck him as both very distant and strangely familiar. "I'll make that tea," Sam said, and Iris followed him into the kitchen, as if it were the most natural thing to do, to go with him rather than stay in the room. Maya opened the balcony door without asking. She just felt like she needed air. Owen followed a moment later, as if that too went without saying. The door stayed open behind them, not wide, just enough to keep them from being cut off entirely from the warmth of the apartment. The city glittered below, port cranes, lit windows in the high-rises, the distant flow of cars along the waterfront. Maya wrapped her arms around her, breathing in the cold night air like it might rinse something clean inside her. "Didn't think you'd want air too," Owen said, standing beside her. Her shoulder was close enough to his that he was aware of the distance between them. "I rarely do. Tonight's the exception." "You always had exceptions exactly when it mattered most. And I always had a rule for every exception." They both smiled slightly, not really from humor, more from recognition that hadn't gone anywhere in 20 years. For a while they said nothing, just watched the city go on with its night below them. "How did your divorce go?" Maya asked, suddenly. "You never told me the details." "Quietly. No shouting, no fighting over property in court. We just realized we were living in the same apartment like neighbors who say good morning politely." "That's probably worse than shouting." Maya pulled her jacket tighter, though the wind hadn't picked up. She just needed to move while she waited for an answer she was afraid to hear. "Much worse," he agreed. "At least when people shout, it means they still care. We didn't even have that left. The last 6 months, we just coordinated schedules, who was picking up the dry cleaning and when." "Very romantic." "Very. That's when I started understanding why people bury themselves in work." "What about you? Did you run anywhere?" "Into motherhood. Hard to call it running when there's a kid depending on you. But honestly, yeah, that too." A car passed somewhere below, not stopping, its muffled sound pulling both their attention for a moment before it faded into the distance.
Maya breathed in the night air and looked out toward the horizon, where the port lights blurred into the black of the sea. "It was the opposite for me," she said. "Too much shouting. I thought that was passion. Turned out it was just two exhausted people who didn't know another way to express being tired. Regrets? About the marriage? No. About my daughter? Never. About spending all those years trying to prove to myself I could be happy with someone completely wrong for me. Sometimes. How old is she? 12. The best thing that came out of that marriage, and probably the only reason I don't regret it completely. What's she like? Smart. Too smart for her age. Sometimes she looks at me like she can see straight through every excuse I make. Last week, she asked why I keep smiling when I clearly don't want to. What did you tell her? That's just what adults do. She said that sounds sad. She's right. I know. I know, Maya said quietly. And here's the worst part. If she asked me whether there was anyone I didn't have to pretend with, I honestly wouldn't have known what to say. Until tonight. Owen went still for a second, as if he'd heard more than she'd actually said. Maya fell silent for a moment, looking down at her hands on the balcony railing. You know what she wants most for her birthday? She asked suddenly. For Mom to stop being sad when she thinks I'm not looking. She sounds like you. Maya leaned her shoulder against his without a word. Owen nodded as if he recognized the thought as his own, just dressed in different words. I got married a year after graduation, not because of you, though probably partly because of you, because I didn't have the nerve to wait for what I actually wanted, and I grabbed the first thing that felt safe. You never struck me as someone who reaches for safe. I learned to. In business, it's even a useful trait. In life, not so much. When did you figure out the difference? Owen paused as if weighing whether to answer honestly. When I realized I could list every deal I'd closed in the last 5 years, but couldn't remember a single conversation with my wife that lasted more than 10 minutes. Maya just let her hand rest near his on the railing. She laughed quietly, and it came out sadder than it should have. She turned away for a moment, looking down at the street, long enough to blink the wet from her eyes without being seen. A muffled horn sounded from the port crane below. The work down there never stopped, not even at night. Cargo didn't wait for the city to sleep. Maya watched the lights of a small tugboat moving slowly along the pier. At graduation, she said, suddenly, you stood by the exit all night. I saw you. I was waiting for you to come over. I was waiting too. We got good at waiting, just not for each other, I guess. Maya wrapped her fingers around the cold railing without a word, watching an old tree branch sway in the wind by the entrance below. Owen moved closer until their shoulders nearly touched. Did you ever think about what would have happened if one of us had had the nerve back then? He asked, quieter now. Every day, Maya said, and immediately regretted being that honest. But the word was already out, and there was no taking it back. We knew it was the real thing, she said finally, not looking at him. Owen was quiet for a few seconds. Because we were both afraid of looking weak, he said finally. All we had to say was, I need you. We both knew how to build much longer sentences for much less important things. Can you say it now? He looked at her in a way that made the question unnecessary. The pause stretched longer than it should have, long enough for Maya to think maybe he wouldn't say it after all, that 20 years had taught him to stay quiet too well. I need you, Maya. Maya held her breath for a second, trying to hold on to the moment a little longer than time allowed. He took her hand, this time sure of it, none of the hesitation from when he'd reached across the table hours ago. Her fingers were cold from the night air, and without thinking he covered them with his other hand, warming them. I don't want to play the quiet game anymore, Maya. I've come home to an empty house too long, same hallway every night, same silence, and never anyone to tell about my day. She squeezed his fingers back, the same way she had 20 years ago, in the dark, back when she didn't know his name nearly as well as she did now. Me too, she said. A cup clinked behind the door, and somewhere deeper in the apartment, Iris laughed quietly. Maya rested her head against his shoulder, listening to his heartbeat steady under her ear, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't try to guess what came next.
Chapter 7. The Kitchen. Sam's kitchen was like the rest of the apartment, small, a little cluttered, with open shelves where jars of grains sat arranged not by size, but by whatever mood he'd been in when he put them there. A wilted houseplant sat on the windowsill, one that could clearly have used watering at least once a week. Iris sat on a tall stool by the window, while Sam opened one cabinet, then another, hunting for the teapot. It should be here somewhere, he muttered, peering behind a jar of buckwheat. "Maybe try the top one? Top one's for pans." "Sam." He opened the top one. The teapot was sitting right there, under a layer of dust like some kind of museum piece. "Told you I hadn't used it in a while," he said, blowing dust off the lid, then coughed at his own cloud of it. Iris slid off the stool, came closer, and reached past him for the tea shelf she'd already spotted. 3 boxes, all nearly empty, pushed together as if someone had put them there and forgotten about them. "See?" she said, holding out one of the boxes. "Not that long ago. That's a New Year's gift from my mom. Every year she hopes I'll finally turn into the kind of person who drinks tea instead of coffee on the run. And are you? Tonight I am." Iris froze for a second, with the box of tea in her hands, realizing a beat late that tonight hadn't only been about the tea. He smiled without turning around and set the kettle on the stove. While the water heated, Sam opened the fridge to check for a lemon and regretted it immediately. Iris looked over his shoulder and saw an unwrapped block of cheese, a wilted cucumber, a box of yesterday's pizza, and nothing else that could be called food for a grown adult. "I did warn you," he said, closing the door faster than he'd opened it. "Do you actually eat?" she asked. "Sometimes, mostly whatever gets brought into the office." "That's not an answer," Iris noted, crossing her arms. "It's an honest one," he said, and smiled in a way that made arguing pointless. He went back to the stove. Iris settled onto the stool again and watched him move around the cramped kitchen, sure, practiced motions, built up over years living alone. He straightened a crooked mug handle without thinking, wiped a drop of water off the counter with his palm, and lined the 2 cups up so the handles faced the same way, exactly how he used to do it in school, handing out tea to the whole class during break. "You are always like this," she thought. "I just never let myself notice before." "Why didn't you come find me after that concert?" she asked suddenly, once the pause had gone on too long to explain away as just making tea. Sam froze for a second, holding the teapot over the 2 cups. "I figured you'd pick someone flashier, someone who'd be up on stage with you, not stuck behind a soundboard in some dark corner of the room." "I wasn't looking for flashy," Iris said quietly. "I didn't know that then." He looked down at his hands, smiling faintly to himself. He set both cups on the table carefully, as if worried about spilling more than just the tea, and sat down across from her, close enough that their knees nearly touched under the narrow counter. "And what would have changed if you had known?" asked she. "Maybe everything, maybe nothing," Sam said, turning an empty spoon between his fingers. "I was a 17-year-old kid who just figured out he was in love with the loudest girl in school, and I was terrified it would become obvious to everyone, including you."
Someone passed by outside, their shadow flickering across the kitchen ceiling for a second before it vanished. "I was scared too," she said. "Just not of it becoming obvious, of you turning out to be exactly what you seemed, steady, calm, real, because then I wouldn't have anywhere left to run." Sam opened his mouth as if to answer, then closed it again, unable to find words that wouldn't sound either too trivial or too heavy for the moment. Iris picked up a spoon and started stirring her tea, though she hadn't put any sugar in it, just to keep her hands busy while the words she'd said sank in. She kept at it far longer than any tea in the world would ever need. He noticed, and neither one of them said anything about it. "Is there anyone in your life right now?" she asked, suddenly, as if afraid if she didn't ask now, she never would. "No one. Almost a year now. And you?" "No one either. The last person I dated kept comparing me to someone. Never said who, but I always felt like I was losing. Once he told me, 'Don't take this the wrong way, but my ex used to smile like nothing happened, too.' I wasn't offended. I just realized I'd always be a copy of someone else to him." "Sounds like a real catch," Sam said, dryly. "Real one."
Iris smiled, for the first time all evening, not a sad smile, but a real one, as if that one dry line had told her something she'd never heard from him at 17, that he was on her side, no conditions attached. "I'm sorry," he added quietly. "Don't be," she answered, still looking into her cup instead of at him. "It taught me one thing. I don't want to come second anymore, not even to a memory of some guy behind a soundboard." She said it half as a joke, but something in her voice gave away that there was less joke in it than she'd have liked to admit. Sam, pouring himself more hot water, whistled 2 short notes almost without thinking, a fragment of a melody no one had played in 20 years. Iris didn't freeze right away. First, she just stopped stirring. Then she looked up. "You remember?" she asked. "Remember what?" he asked, confused, and only then, seeing her face, realized what he'd just done. "Oh, that was without thinking. You used to whistle it back then, too, right before you turned my mic on." "I didn't know you'd heard it," he admitted. Iris took a sip of tea, in no hurry to answer. "I heard it. I just never asked what the melody was." He sat down across from her, without a word. "I told you tonight that I was scared of how reliable you were," Iris said, quieter, wrapping both hands around her cup. "That wasn't honest of me. What I was really scared of was someone I couldn't doubt or run from anymore. Scared I didn't deserve someone who wouldn't leave." She didn't look up for a long moment after that, tracing a finger around the rim of her cup, almost surprised at herself for saying it out loud. "You do," Sam said, without a trace of hesitation. Iris looked up and met his eyes directly, not sideways, not through the cup, just straight on. "How do you know?" she asked quietly. "Because I've spent 20 years watching you deserve it, just not from up close." Iris stopped turning her cup. Her fingers went still against the porcelain. She looked at him and, for the first time all evening, found nothing to joke back with. "Why didn't you come find me after that concert?" she asked again, though he'd already answered. "Because I thought I had time." "And when did you figure out you never really have as much time as you think you do at 17? "Tonight, around the time Maya said those 20 years out loud. I sat there thinking, there it is, that's us too." Iris covered his hand with hers, slowly, without any of the hesitation that could be mistaken for an accident. "I never needed someone on stage," Iris said. "I needed someone who wouldn't forget my own song." Sam looked at her hand on his as if he were afraid to move and ruin it. "I still remember that melody," he said quietly. "Sing it," she said. "I'm a terrible singer." "I know. I remember from school choir. They asked you to just mouth the words." He laughed, really laughed, for the first time all evening, with no bitterness in it at all. "Then I'll sing," Iris said, "and you feed me the line when I go quiet." She hummed a few notes, wordlessly, the same melody. Sam recognized it right away and picked it up mid-line, quietly, unsure of himself, and got the word wrong. Iris burst out laughing. "Told you," she said, wiping a tear of laughter away with the edge of her palm. "At least I remember there was a word," he answered, smiling. He covered her hand with his other one, carefully. She didn't pull away. Both of them could hear the forgotten kettle bubbling quietly on the stove, and neither one hurried to get up and turn it off. The tea in their cups went slowly cold, untouched. Dawn painted the sky the color of ash, that particular shade you only get in a city by the sea, somewhere between night and morning. The port cranes lit up against the dark all night, faded into the gray light now, just metal shapes among other shapes. Somewhere in the port, a tugboat sounded its horn, getting ready for the morning shift, a sound that would have been perfectly ordinary at any other hour, and now felt almost solemn. The balcony had grown noticeably lighter. Maya gave Owen a gentle squeeze, a sign it was time to go back to the life waiting for them both outside this night. Somewhere below, a garbage truck rumbled to life, starting its morning route. She didn't want to go back inside, but there was no point staying out here any longer either. The night that had just changed everything was ending, the way every night ends eventually, no matter how much it mattered. In the living room, Iris was zipping up her jacket while Sam stood nearby, holding the scarf she'd left on the back of her chair. On the kitchen table, the 2 forgotten cups still sat there. Iris automatically nudged them closer together, handles facing the same way, then froze, realizing she was doing exactly what he always did. Sam noticed and said nothing, just smiled with one corner of his mouth. None of the 4 was in a hurry to say the word home. It suddenly felt inaccurate, like it no longer quite described where they were headed. "Cab's 5 minutes out," Owen said, looking at his phone. Maya nodded, zipping her jacket just as slowly as Iris was doing it in the next room, neither of them in a hurry to leave. All 4 of them went down together, the same stairs they'd climbed a few hours earlier, only their footsteps sounded different now, lighter than before. By the entrance, all 4 of them paused together for a moment. No words, just a shared sense that the evening which had started at the cafe had finally found its ending. Maya looked at Iris. Iris just smiled back. Owen and Sam exchanged a look and left it at that. Iris hugged Maya. Owen shook Sam's hand, longer than a handshake usually calls for. Outside, the city was still asleep, but not with the same deep night quiet that had greeted them earlier. A bus rattled by somewhere in the distance. A janitor swept the sidewalk by the next building unhurriedly, and the air smelled less like the sea now and more like the morning dampness that always comes before real daylight. The cab pulled up to the curb, its headlights laying yellow patches across the wet asphalt. Maya and Owen stopped by the open car door. "See you tomorrow?" Owen asked. Maya glanced up at the sky, then at her phone for no real reason, as if checking the time, though time didn't mean much right now. "Today?" she corrected quietly. "Today's already here." He smiled. "Today, then. 6 by the park?" "I'll be there," she answered without a moment's hesitation. He leaned in and kissed her, quick on the temple. Maya stayed still for a second, touching the spot where his lips had just been, then finally got into the car. Owen shut the door behind her and stood there for a few seconds, watching the cab pull away. Once the taillights disappeared around the corner, he stayed a little longer on the empty sidewalk before turning back. Sam and Iris, meanwhile, stood off to the side a little, waiting for their own ride. "I'll pick you up after work," he said. "What time do you get off?" 6. "Then I'll be ready by 7, Iris said. "Women need extra time to be impressive." "You're impressive already." "I know, but habit is habit." Iris took his hand, herself first, without the hesitation that had kept her from touching his palm just a few hours earlier. He smiled and touched her cheek lightly, careful, as if this might turn out to be a dream she'd wake into someone else's arms. "Good," Iris said simply. There was more calm in her eyes than there'd been in years. Maya watched through the cab window as the city slowly woke up along the road. Nearby, Sam and Iris were climbing into their own car, and Iris, before shutting the door, looked back at Owen one more time and waved. They'd simply set a time to meet again. The cabs pulled away in opposite directions, and for the first time in 20 years, each of them knew exactly where they'd be coming back to that evening.
Chapter 9. A Year Later. A year later, they were sitting at the Harbor Cafe again. Only now, they weren't the ones with nowhere to go. They just came here because they wanted to. The corner table, the same one they'd sat at that night, had become theirs over a year of Saturday evenings, without anyone ever deciding it out loud. Maya went up to the counter herself for the cups, without waiting for anyone to offer to help. a motion so natural it was hard to believe she'd once just been a guest here. At the next table, someone was celebrating a birthday. Nothing loud, just a few balloons and a cake with a candle. And that small, unrelated celebration somehow made the room warmer than usual. "The usual?" she called across the room to Iris. "The usual," Iris answered, not looking up from her phone, where she was showing Sam vacation photos. The girl behind the counter was new. She hadn't been there a year ago, but she'd already learned their order. "They told me you always get the same thing," she said, setting the cups on a tray. Owen sat leaning back in his chair, his phone face down and pushed to the far edge of the table, a habit he hadn't had a year ago. He finished his cold tea without hurrying, without even flinching at how long it had been since it was warm. "Remember how we weren't even sure it was worth coming in that night?" he said. "I wasn't thinking, I just wanted tea. You always say that when you don't want to admit you felt something. And you always read subtext into things that weren't there." "One of these days I'll guess right," Sam said, covering her hand with his right there on the table, not hiding the gesture the way he would have a year ago. "One of these days," she agreed. Iris turned her hand palm up, lacing her fingers with his, and neither of them so much as glanced at the gesture. It had long since stopped being anything worth noticing, just another way of sitting together. "By the way," Maya said, turning to everyone, "my niece asks to come to the Harbor Cafe every weekend now, says they make the best hot chocolate in town." "She just hasn't tried mine yet," the woman behind the counter said, passing by with a tray. "She has. That's why she keeps asking," Maya answered, and the woman smiled, like it wasn't just a polite reply, but something she already knew about the girl. Maya smiled, watching Sam and Iris tease each other as easily as if they'd done it their whole lives, though a year ago there'd been 20 years of silence standing between them. Outside, a woman walked by with a dog, paused for a second to look at the lit-up window, and moved on. "Are you two ever going to stop teasing each other?" she asked. "Never," Sam and Iris almost said at the same time, and this time they didn't even seem surprised they'd matched. Maya automatically nudged Owen's cup away from the edge of the table, just as automatically as she'd been doing for months now, every time he left it right there. "You still worried I'll knock it over?" he asked. "I already know you will, I just know when now." "You know what's the strangest part?" she said to Owen, quieter, while Sam and Iris argued about who'd actually suggested going to Sam's place first. "I don't remember anymore what it's like to wake up and not know what I'll tell you tonight." "Is that bad memory or a good life?" "The second one, definitely the second one. I still remember everything, every little detail of that night, even what tea you ordered." "It doesn't matter." "Which?" "That's exactly what you said, word for word." Maya laughed, warm, with none of the sadness that used to color her laugh before, even when it was genuine. He took her hand under the table, an easy, familiar motion, none of the careful hesitance from that balcony, and just held it while the rest of the conversation went on around them. Someone at the next table paid and left. Someone else came in, looked around, and walked back out into the evening. Outside, the streetlights came on one by one along the waterfront, and none of the four even noticed, too deep in their own conversation. Owen pulled out his phone, glanced at the screen, and put it straight back in his pocket without checking any messages. "Anyone important?" she asked. "No one more important than this table," he said, and it came out so simply it didn't even feel like an extra compliment. The woman behind the counter came over herself to clear the cups. Iris and Sam had already finished theirs, and Owen's had long had nothing left but a few sips of cold tea. "The usual?" she asked, looking at all four of them at once. "The usual," they answered, almost in unison. She smiled. "Good, means I remembered right." She disappeared behind the counter for a moment, then came back. "Sorry, everyone," she said, glancing at the clock. "We're closing up." Maya squeezed Owen's hand tighter. "We know," she smiled.
They got up reluctantly, gathering phones and jackets. She turned off the light over their table last. For a second, all four of them stood in the dark. Iris was the first to take Sam's hand. Maya felt Owen's fingers find hers. This time, nobody laughed, because every one of them knew exactly whose hand they were holding when the lights went out.